this is exciting. We are this is the 20th anniversary of E3.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. It's been 20
Almost
years.
old enough to drink. That's next year. It's gonna get.
Well, you can drink like if E2 doesn't find out about
I hear
it.
that next year they're holding E3 in a bar.
Yeah.
Because it's finally old enough.
That would be great.
That'd be a huge bar.
Yeah,
It's
20
massive.
20 years of E3,
Yeah.
and then it is always magical in some way.
Yeah.
Like it's, there's a lot of people that complain about E3 because it's a lot to take in. We were talking about this at lunch. I love E3. It's really, really a magical. It is our industry's Christmas. There's this sort of palpable energy in the air everywhere you go. Everyone is excited to show stuff. Developers are excited because they're finally revealing something they've been working on for a long time. The audience is excited because they can kind of see where their money is going to go over the next year and a half and their time. And we're excited because we get to cover it. We get to talk about it. And we get to tell people what we saw and what we loved. So
No, I think that E3 is for pretty much anybody. For the most part, anybody who's born in the last 30 years, E3 is the closest thing to a chocolate factory you can visit.
Yeah.
It actually still has that magic.
I
It's
mean,
got
there
that.
are probably actual chocolate factories as well.
Sure, no, you can visit chocolate factories, but they're like really depressing.
They're sad.
And
They're like
I mean,
factories.
there are things that are weird and gross and sometimes boring about E3.
Yep.
But it's also really cool because it's a bunch of brand new video games that you don't get to see.
It's just so weird how we consume it now compared to how we consumed it or didn't consume it back in 1995.
Yeah,
That was a long time ago. That was pre-internet.
E3 1995. It was Saturn and PlayStation were both launched there. That exact year, it was kind of here we go. Let's get this started. This is this is games. This is happening.
The Saturn one was weird because they announced first. They announced their specs. They said it is $399 and it is available now.
Yep.
Which was one of the things that led to the Saturn's demise.
Yeah.
Because it's not
It
great.
was available now at places that had it then.
yeah.
Which unfortunately, some of the people who weren't informed about that were retailers who were not carrying it and were then kind of hesitant to carry it when the holidays rolled around.
Yeah,
because they
felt
kind
burned.
of felt snubbed.
Yeah.
And also developers who hadn't really finished games because they didn't realize that it was going to be launching in the middle of the summer.
yeah, there's been this long running sort of E3 tradition to say, and you can play it right now. But kind of historically, not a lot of the best things have come from that.
Yeah, I mean, last year we had the Dead Rising weird DLC
We had-
thing.
we had
That was like a good happy medium.
That was
right
like
there.
that was a thing that it's not a $400 console. It's just like here's some
Exactly.
$10.
Well, we had Entwined, which was basically like, hey, y'all like Journey? Yeah, we do. Well, this is nothing like that. That game didn't really work. I was kind of bummed about that, but I remember like coming back after E3 and downloading some of these games and being like, "Oh, this is an awesome new artsy PlayStation game that uses motion controls, so maybe it'll work."
Yeah.
And it didn't. I didn't like it. So yeah, to do that with a console,
That felt
kind of a tough move, you know?
Yeah, it's a stunt release. Like,
Yeah.
that's not really a good way to actually do that. And something happened at that one fateful
Yeah,
first
like
E3.
literally hours later,
Yeah.
the SEA president at the time, Steve Race, went on stage. He started talking about the PlayStation and said it's going to be available this fall for $299.
Yeah, I wish there was a launch title called Steve Race, where it's
That
just a bunch of guys
Steve
named
Racer?
Steve. Yeah,
But so this was the first time Sony did that, where they announced sort of console details on the same day as a competitor and then undercut them by $100. And we'll talk about the other time they did that later on in the show.
yeah. Also,
Yeah.
like I love that if you go back and watch footage of that first E3, it's like shot on someone's camcorder
Oh,
because
yeah.
there was no way to broadcast it.
Yeah.
No one on TV is going to be showing that, and
Right.
maybe C-SPAN 4 or something.
Yeah, and we were like the way we viewed the E3 was through like what, EGM?
Yeah,
Like,
which came out a month and a half later. You
Yeah,
know, like,
yeah.
and you went to the grocery store
you
to
had
buy
like
it. and now
stamp
it's
size screenshots.
Which-
but
When
it's
I-
really weird because watching that first, like that press conference, so called, like having where he comes up and he's like, "Oh, you had one last words," and he's just like, $299.
Yeah.
It's like I was watching that. I was more weirded out by the fact that the place that they're doing it looked like, I think it was in like a hotel or something.
Yeah.
It looked like where they do the awards ceremony in Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
They're just like, hey, we're at the Holiday Inn for the first annual AVN Awards.
Yeah, and I mean also the big games there. Those weren't the games that people were going to run out and buy. Like they were amazing looking, but Battle Arena, Toshinden, and Ridge Racer, like those aren't the games when we think of PS1 really defining for us. But I guess that's a lot of launch lineups. Like aside from Mario 64, there's not a whole lot of launch games that define a console.
Yeah, consoles usually launch with like 10 mediocre to bad games or one or two really good ones and kind of nothing else. So
totally.
I think that the PlayStation, and I mean we're a little bit biased here, but I think the PlayStation definitely kind of defined what modern gaming has become. Like they were the first ones to use optical media, but at the same time they were off to kind of a rolling start because people like Sony hadn't made a game system before, and game systems were still kind of this weird toy thing.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, we usually make really high-end like audio equipment.
Yep.
We're taking some of that and we're throwing a game where you can be like wizards with swords who fight each other on there and fall out of a wrestling ring.
Yeah.
I think to add to that, I think PlayStation's actually sort of defined what the modern press conference looks like.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have really managed to turn that into the spectacle it is now, with like 5 gigantic screens, and then there's guests that come on, and there's it pumping loud music. Now it's kind of a business model that everybody's been using, but you look at what Nintendo's doing now, they're sort of recoiling into these directs, and Microsoft is kind of there, but as we'll go through this, you'll see that there are some very spectacular highs and lows in the Sony press conferences, and I think that's why it's kind of where they are now, and it's very important that the pressure is on every year to make these things even bigger and bigger.
Yeah, now that there are 7 conferences.
Yes, 9.
Yeah.
What I kind of want to get at though is that I think that it was 96 when the N64 came out, right? And I think that was the thing that like people knew what a Nintendo was, and people could look at a computer game and be like, "What if it's in 3D now? That's wacky." Like people knew Mario at that time, but it's weird to think that at that point, you know, Mario and the kind of the public's understanding of him, like a Nintendo was only 10 years old, which is crazy to think about. Like, I mean, I'm looking at this right now. We're looking at kind of the leap between 95, which was the first E3, and that was when the PlayStation was announced, and then 2000, which was when the PlayStation 2 was like about to come out.
Yeah.
That's like a 5-year difference. It seemed like a lifetime because that was half my lifetime at that point. When I was in 1995, I was 8 years old. So like that's a huge formative chunk of your life.
And in that 5 years, E3 sort of started to take the shape of the E3 we know now, where it had the spectacle. It didn't feel like an uptight, you know, like a hotel convention. This felt like an event.
Yeah.
And that in 2000 with the PS2 and especially the Metal Gear Solid 2 tanker demo.
Right.
That was sort of one of those. I think that tanker demo might be the first thing that really stuck in my mind from an E3 of like, holy crap.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
I had an issue of PSM, the unofficial PlayStation magazine, which had a cover by Joe Madeira
Yep, I remember
of Solid Snake, looking extremely American, and a very busty Olga. And it had screenshots of the tanker demo, and it broke down everything that happened there. They're like, is Vulcan Raven going to show up?
Yeah.
Spoilers for a 15-year-old game. He doesn't.
He was a toy. He was a toy.
Yeah. But I remember I had that magazine, that single issue, and I brought it to summer camp with me, and I poured through it backwards and forwards. And I don't think to this day I don't think I've ever been as excited about a game as I was for Metal Gear Solid 2.
Right.
And that demo was like a sort of generational defining visual leap, like seeing Snake walk across the George Washington Bridge in his rain slicker.
I want to point out the ice bucket. The ice bucket in the tanker demo is like still one of my favorite things in video games ever, because somebody with Kojima's team was like, this will wow them. It's an ice bucket like you get at your hotel. It's filled up full of ice cubes. If you shoot it with your gun, it'll flip over and the ice cubes will fall out. And they will melt in real time. I mean, maybe not a little bit faster than real ice cubes, but then you can shoot them individually and they'll bust. And it's just like, that's like,
Yep.
That was one of those like, wow.
And this is when, like, we've seen over the years that E3 has either been a sort of like a celebration of a console, right? Saying this is basically how much it's sold and how many systems are out there. Here's our market demographic, pie charts and graphs and stuff like that, and numbers. But it's also been like awesome coming out parties for games, and seeing a vertical slice live on stage at a press conference is a make it or break it moment for a lot of games. And we've seen them break, and it's embarrassing and it's awful, but we've seen them soar, and that's the stuff that gets people to run to a store and be like, that's what sold me on that game, is that press conference, that demo. And that was Metal Gear's moment.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that thing ended up not being a vertical slice because that was the opening act of that game.
Yeah, and then they're like, go out and buy Zone of the Enders next year, and you can play this cool new robot game that, oh, by the way, comes with a thing where you can realistically shoot an ice bucket. There's also watermelons you can blow up.
I'm curious if that left as much of an impact on the audience as it did on us. Tweet at us using the hashtag Beyond. And tell us if that demo was as amazing.
Yeah, do we have any responses there?
Yeah, people are asking us a lot of questions. At Solid Duff says, Do you think Yooka-Laylee has a chance of making it to E3? I don't know.
We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a Kickstarter game, so I think that pulling that towards any sort of semblance of like platform exclusivity might be a little early for that. I think you'd anger a lot of people that paid for it.
Sure. Especially, I don't see it happening with Microsoft because it's almost like you're not gonna like be hanging out with your ex too much.
Yeah.
It also, I mean, it hasn't really. I mean, I don't think it's really a game you can show off yet.
Yeah, totally.
It's also not something that's going to wow people. Like, we got to remember that E3 is, in fact, also a trade show, and it's about, like, new, big, exciting things, and Yooka-Laylee is very much
It's about getting Walmart excited, USA Today, the Today Show. Yeah.
Yeah, you're showing them an ice bucket. You're not showing them a thing from 10 years ago that's been faithfully kind of remastered in modern
Really love
sensibilities.
this ice bucket.
Yeah, I love the ice bucket. I think it's great. It's an exciting thing.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah, I don't know. I think that also we forget that to be at E3, it costs game publishers stupid, disgusting, terrible amounts of money.
Yeah.
To have a booth, to have any space on the floor, it's millions.
Yeah.
It's like it's really gross. And to be showing up at a press conference, there's going to be some weird politics going on.
Yeah, totally.
There isn't really like a Kickstarter corner of E3, right? Like those guys, the art school kids don't all sit together.
The K would be like backwards.
Yeah, So use the hashtag. That's hashtag Beyond. We are doing this live. If you're watching the show right now, thank you so much. You're probably just as excited for E3 as we are.
Give him a shout out.
Matt Hawthorne says, "Is it weird that I'm watching this on my Xbox One?" No. Absolutely not. That's awesome.
We have a lovely Xbox One app, a lovely PS4 app.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Send
send us your questions. Send us your E3 predictions. We'll read them on the air. Junho says, "What were your favorite E3s?" We're actually going to get into that.
We are going to get into that. I think, Max, your favorite that moment was the Metal Gear Solid 2 moment for you.
Yeah, I mean, the Metal Gear Solid 2 demo was like that. The excitement I had. It was also, I think it was a summer of, was it the 2000 E3? It would have been, I think, the following year. It was like summer of 2001.
Yeah.
But I was just incredibly really excited for that game. It was also it just happened at really like a very special point in my life.
Yeah, totally.
I was like getting into girls,
like
drawing lots
Olga.
of Dragon Ball Z fan art. Like those things aren't connected, but I don't know. It was just like it's tied to a really kind of significant time in my life.
Yeah, that E3 also it walked a fine line. It showed us the future with Metal Gear Solid 2, but it also had games like Chrono Cross and Final Fantasy 9 that was like, hey, everyone who still has a PS1, we still have a handful of amazing games that you're gonna like.
Yep, wonderful, great E3, just fantastic.
So that was a good one.
Let's get on to the bad.
Let's get on to the bad one.
Let's get on to what, and this is, you're going to get upset about this, but I think a lot of people, me especially, consider this to be one of the worst E3 press conferences ever. And not because the games were bad, because I think there were a lot of really good games that shown at this. This is 2006. Yeah. This is when the PS3 pricing was first revealed. To paint the picture, we are dealing with a astronomically cocky Sony, who is fresh off of the PS2, which is the best-selling system of all time. Absolutely trouncing the competition. I think it sold something like 100 million units more than the GameCube and the Xbox, which hovered at around 21, 22 million units. PS2 just quadrupled, quintupled, sextupled, whatever that is. Sextupled. All the way into the stratosphere. And they basically, you're dealing with, you have Kaz Hirai, who's this kind of, seems like a nice guy, and you have Ken Kutaragi, who's like very cocky old Japanese business guy. Now, Ken Kutaragi starts saying things like, we could sell the PS3 without any games and we'd still sell 1 million units, and things like, you're going to need a second job to afford this thing. And we're like, what's going on?
That's not a good thing.
Yeah, these are real quotes.
Yeah.
So they came out in 2006, and this is when we heard the first time the PS3 was priced. Now, I'll get into the good news first. They talked about some of the games that we'd be playing in and around launch. We have Uncharted, Killzone Liberation.
So we were showing some PSP stuffs.
Heavenly Sword, Resistance, Fall of Man. Like there were some good games there. Final Fantasy 13
came out.
Yeah, 8 Days, which still
that's not a thing. Also, so Final Fantasy 13 and Versus 13, which we got to play that demo a couple months ago. That was the first time we got to play that game.
Wow.
So the big thing about E3 press conferences is that the crowd reactions are palpable. You actually hear them through your tiny little computer speakers. You're watching them on your phone. If you're in the room, there's a magic in the air when something good happens. Yeah. And when they came out and they said that the PS3 would cost $599 US, there was a deafening gasp in the room. It was just, why?
Yeah.
And we all got scared because I think we thought that this would be the trend. That video games were now becoming this almost like deluxe high-end consumer thing. Where they kind of landed now is that video game consoles have been around, $300, $400 for the last.
I thought you were going to say they've been around 300, 400 years.
400,000 years.
That's not correct.
That's right. 400-year-old video game.
It's funny you started talking about history of things. There was also the wonderful demo for Genji, which had they were like, this draws from real, actual Japanese history.
Here's this giant enemy crab.
Like a giant enemy crab. I like that they also they were like, they're not just like, we're fighting a giant crab. They're like, this is a giant enemy crab.
And you can flip him over and hit his weak point for massive damage.
Yeah.
It was cringeworthy. And then you had that, and you had Kaz Hirai, who came out and said, Ridge Racer.
Yeah.
It's Ridge Racer. And everyone in the room was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, why is this happening?
You don't have to do that. So so to me,
launch title.
Yeah. I am fascinated by this because this is sort of watching a company at the top make a really big blunder and turn the tide. And from there, we saw the Xbox 360 actually went to sell way more than the PS3 for a very long time, and things kind of evened out here and there a few years later.
Yeah, it goes to show you how much a good or bad press conference can sort of dictate the tone of an entire generation.
Yeah.
Which sort of, we have a role reversal later on. But before we get there, there was 2012, which was this weird sort of middle period. We weren't ready to talk about PS4 yet, but we still have a couple cool PS3 games, but we also have some really boring stuff that we're going to kill the momentum with. So the highlight there was The Last of Us. We had an incredible Last of Us demo.
You nailed it, because we were in that weird era where we knew there was a PS4. It was called the Orbis. We didn't know what it was. No one could publicly admit or confirm in any capacity that they were working on this thing.
That's when we saw Watch Dogs, and it was like the first. It's like, when we know this isn't coming to current gen.
Yeah.
I mean, it did.
It did.
But no, it's like totally. That's totally true. I also think that there was this exhaustion of like, we wanted a new toy, like we wanted to see something new and exciting, and they were kind of getting the most mileage out of it. I mean, before we get out of PS3 territory, I think it's worth pointing out that structurally how the PS3 worked was different from, like, I mean, there isn't a consistent pattern in how consoles function. Yeah, they're not really like a computer where it's kind of like evolved rationally. They've always kind of done weird experimental things, but the Xbox 360 was kind of loosely based on a PC, which is a thing that they used to make games. The PS3 trotted out the cell processor, which was like, what if you, like, so the way it was explained to me by a friend who works at a game company who shall remain nameless, because I'm sure he loves his job.
Fumito Ueda.
Yes, it was the president of Nintendo himself. He said that to me. No, but he's saying that like the Xbox 360 was like having a classroom full of B+ students, and they all do their homework assignments on time, and they know what they're supposed to do, and it might not be, the most brilliant thing in the world. Whereas the PlayStation 3 is like having a small think tank of like brilliant but autistic savants who have to be worked with one-on-one to be like, here's your deal. Like, here's what you're working on. Here's your formula. And it had to be basically, the tasks all had to be divvied up separately. Whereas you could just throw a problem. You could throw one homework assignment at this B+ class and be like, dude, make the game look cool. And they're like, okay. And it might be like a little bit less exciting. And that's why, PlayStation 3 exclusives like The Last of Us are incredible, because they're specialized. And that's always been...
They were built from the ground up for the system specifically.
And if you want to get actually really kind of deep into it, that's proprietary hardware and software is actually kind of ingrained into Sony's business model from the very first what's it called, the radios they would make, the
Walkman.
No, way before that. I'm talking 60s, like little radios, transistor radios. They were actually the first company to get Texas Instrument transistors. That they bought the patent for them, but they designed their own, basically.
Yeah, that was at E3 1895.
No, I mean, but it's one of those things where it's like it worked for them. They were like, there you go.
And then they made the PS4, which obviously was way easier to develop for, as we've seen by the tremendous library of games. And I think there's more parity between that and the Xbox One, despite the resolution gate and all the other stuff.
Yeah,
the PS4 was humility. Like out the gate, it was just they didn't say it. They didn't say we screwed up last time, but they're like, We're listening.
But 2012 was a really awesome. It's like you get the early years at E3s when a company's first showing off its console, and then you get the winter years where it's coming to an end, and you get weird kind of swan song games that happen. And in 2012, there was still some life left in the PS3, and the stuff we saw there was just awesome. Like it was really just like, we're celebrating this console, we're firing on all cylinders. There was even stuff like Assassin's Creed Liberation for Vita, which was just like, hey, this thing's still we're gonna put a shot in the arm here. It's getting an exclusive Assassin's Creed game. It's one of the biggest franchises in the world. And then we got Wonderbook, which was.
I remember everyone just being like so angry because it was like this thing, and this was also right after Sony had like a really rough time. They'd had the massive hack, and it was just like, it wasn't doing great. The whole joke was always they always had system updates to deal with. And they were like, all right, sorry, here's some games. There's lots of cool games. That's what you're here. That's what you care about. You like this machine because it plays games, right? Like that's the whole point. And everyone's like, yes, yes, yes. And then they're like, we've worked together closely with J.K. Rowling herself to create an authentic augmented reality Harry Potter experience, and then it was like a 10-minute demo of this kid reading a fake book.
My
and
God.
we're like, we were just like,
it was the 10 longest minutes in the world. Actually, I believe that you can actually watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy director's cut during the Wonderbook section of that press conference.
Although
it was so long. It took all of the life out of the room, like all of the rhythm and energy that was going with all the stuff we had seen so far. And then it was just like, here's a book no one in this room will ever play this.
It was literally the only moment in press conference history at IGN where everyone didn't have to work. We just stopped working because it's like, well, there's nothing to write now.
There was nothing.
We have nothing
happening
to write. We have nothing to shoot. We're just sitting here.
And that's a cool thing we should talk about. You know, this will be my 7th E3 at IGN. Max will be your first, but you've been to a bunch of E3s before.
Yeah, this is my 53, I think.
You can kind of tell in the room when something's working or when something isn't, because we're not like robots. We're not even real adults.
Nope.
Like we get really excited during E3, and in that war room where we're all sitting, when there's an announcement, we go crazy for it because we're going to be playing those games too.
Yeah.
And there are times when that stuff happens, like Wonderbook, where we go, oh, well, this E3 is not just for us. It's for the New York Times. It's for CNN. It's for CNET. It's for, the New Yorker. Like, they're going to send a guy. There's like a little guy in the corner with a feather in his hat, and he's like, there's a book based on Harry Potter. You can play it on the floor.
Wonderbook wasn't for anyone because I don't think anyone bought it.
Yeah, no one bought it. So
Did it ever come out?
Yeah.
They did?
No, I don't think the J.K. Rowling thing, but there was like a thing about a slug who was a detective.
Yeah, it's
Little slug.
Are you actually? Are you 100% sure that it came out?
I'm 100% sure because I went to a Walmart and bought it.
Oh, okay. All right. There we go. Because I'm like, that's one of those things that I don't really feel that guilty about it, but I just really aggressively ignored it.
Yeah.
So a lot of ups and downs in that one, kind of all over the place. I want to go to the year 2013.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Which was a year of almost no downs and just entirely. This was round 10 in like the heavyweight boxing match, right? And this was at the end of the first very long day on E3, where you've seen every press conference. Microsoft had theirs. They announced the pricing for the Xbox One. They announced they were sort of trying to get out from under that draconian game sharing nonsense that they'd explained. They really made it seem like the always online DRM nightmare dystopia future was a thing we'd all have to deal with forever.
Yeah, they announced the $500
Yep.
SKU.
They in the same way that Sony almost set the course for that $599 systems almost became the regular had it not been for that audible gasp in the room. Microsoft had almost created a world where playing video games is a lot more difficult than it should be.
Yep.
And sharing them was incredibly difficult. So Sony came on after them, which was, an amazing moment, and it's now 6:00 at night on a Monday night, and we're all in this giant room in IGN, and we're watching this press conference, and Sony announces not only the price for the PS4, but they also announce how game sharing works, and this is my single favorite moment in E3 history. They have Shuhei Yoshida and Adam Boyes, who are two PlayStation guys, and they came up and they said, "Here's how game sharing works on PS4." And Shuhei handed the game to Adam Boyes.
Yeah.
And they said, "That's it."
That is.
And it was it was quiet, it was warm, it was subtle, it was beautiful, and it was awesome.
I believe the correct
so
expression is "pew pew 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 pew."
Yeah.
Like that was such
awesome.
that was just an epic mic drop.
It was
That
awesome. It
incredible.
was like this whole Nas and Jay-Z thing, and it was so good because there was nothing. There was nothing anybody at Microsoft could do. And I remember there was a guy that worked in the room. I won't say his name. Who worked for Xbox, and he came after his press conference, being like, "How was that?" And we were like, "Great, good job, really awesome." He's like, "Can I watch the PlayStation one with you guys?" And we watched it with him, and he was like, "Damn it!"
Yeah, that was insane. That was
I got on camera and live on the air. I pre-ordered my PS4 from Amazon, and I said, if you're going to want to pre-order your PS4 right now, and you're going to want to join the winning team, because these guys are going to take this messaging and they're going to dominate with it." And I still think to this day that has really been what has caused their leap in the console wars over Microsoft. Microsoft's messaging was messy, and then they spent the next 3 days like unraveling it and saying sorry, and they put up this whole thing that they then pulled down all these rules of what you could and couldn't do.
No, it's just it's a complicated mess.
That whole conference was just win after win. It was re-revealing Final Fantasy 15. It was showing Kingdom Hearts 3. It had Infamous, The Order. It was then sort of laying out their indie plan, where they brought out like 10 indie developers on stage standing up and being like, yes, this is like, we're getting behind these guys 100%.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting to look at, just like, I love looking at the kind of the history, the hindsight of this, because it's the triptych effect. It's trying, or not the triptych, it's the hat trick. You know, it's when you try to get 3 in a row, and like the N64 was Nintendo's third console, but there wasn't really any kind of precedent set.
Yeah.
The Sega, am I right here? The Sega CD is also kind of, or not the Sega Saturn was Sega's, and they were like, "Here's the thing, we're gonna," and it was like, you get kind of sloppy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the kicker to Empire Strikes Back is that Vader is Luke's father, and then
hey man.
Sorry, I know you're getting through it.
While wearing a Star Wars shirt.
But then it's like, how do you top that? Because like, it's people, like humans are, however it is our brains are wired, we like 3s because there's something kind of exciting about that to us.
Yep.
But so often, everything you try to do right in the second installment, you try to one up in the third.
Yeah.
Or conversely, which you see this more with, I think, products, is you get kind of like, wow, the second went really well. They'll love whatever we do with this next one. The Xbox One is Microsoft's PS3.
Yeah.
They're just like, it is, the word is hubris. Like, it was just this bloated kind of like, you know what?
Yeah.
They'll come along for the ride. And it's, I don't, like, we're kind of ending.
That's kind of the messaging that's really important in the history of the video game industry, is that there's no guarantee win forever.
Yeah.
You know, you can be at the top of the world and then fall and then climb back up. I mean, we saw it with Nintendo, we saw it with PlayStation, and you know, maybe we'll see it again with Xbox. Like this E3 in a month, Sony could come out and do the worst, dumbest thing in the world. They could do an hour of Wonder Book 2, and maybe the console wars will change. Maybe everything will change in a heartbeat. But I have a feeling that won't happen.
Yeah. Let's hope.
Let's hope.